So this is what we're going to do. My name is Michael White. I work for VMware out of Palo Alto. I have a new title, Senior Technical Marketing Architect. Really what it means is I dream up stuff in the BCDR space to help you, the customer. Some of you are partners to help you, in other words, try and put collateral into your hands. As an example, some things broke on Sunday. Before I rushed off to work here, I sent out a newsletter to our partners so that they knew the day before a couple of things that break, so that when they go out to see customers, they won't have it break for them. So I just dream up stuff, basically. So data recovery, it's a great product, and we're going to talk about it, and any questions, just let us know. Oh yeah, we'll just skip that. So agendas. If any of you have seen me present before, I'm not very fond of agendas, so we're not going to spend much time on this one, but I have an opportunity to use my laser, and I love these things. The appendix, it's in brackets. This is a very famous deck, believe it or not, because everything I learn, and when a customer asks me something, and I write it down, or the customer writes it down, and I go find the answer, the customer hears the answer, but guess what? I put it in this deck. So VMworld gets angry at this deck because it's 60 or 70 slides long, and they don't realize I don't go through all 60 or 70 slides. So just remember, the appendix in brackets is where I catch, the place where I store everything that's cool and good to know. Otherwise, we'll just go through things. So we're going to go through the basics. We're going to learn about installing and configuring. We're going to talk about some best practices. I sit on a list where I monitor all the problems and all the solutions, and of course, when I do that, I'm able to come up with some ideas that I can make as suggestions in here today that'll save you some hardship. And we'll talk about those too. Most of the slides in this deck are mine. This isn't one of them. This is much prettier than mine. What we're talking about here, VMware Data Recovery has two functions. Function one is to do a backup. But there's a couple of things up there that are really particularly interesting. The deduplicated storage. What that means is, if you're backing up a number of Windows virtual machines, and you're backing them up to one particular location, in other words, that location is filled with Windows virtual machines, we're able to deduplicate them. What that translates to is, in my personal lab, that means 61% of the disk is used, not 100%. So I have a savings, quite significant. Now, if I happen to put a whole bunch of Windows machines and Linux machines and whatever else you could have in your environment, all in the same place, it might not be 61%. It might be a little worse. So, really important thing to remember. Something else I quite like is right in here, centralized management through Virtual Center. We're trying very hard to make sure that when you have applications from us, like this new one, VMware Data Recovery, you manage it using the same skills that you've always used. Meaning, if you know how to use Virtual Center, well, you pretty much know how to use this product. You can go to one place to see what the audit history is for Site Recovery Manager, or you can go to one place for the history of your backups, and it's in the same world. It's all in Virtual Center, so I think that's pretty good. That green doesn't look quite that green on my computer. Hi there. Oh, see, that's what I worry about. So the gentleman is just asking if he keeps the same OSs in a data store, that he's going to get about the same rate as I did of deduplication. And of course, I have to say that, what's that saying about how things will vary according, the mileage? However, the answer is yes, that if you have similar virtual machines, I've seen customers do that on SQL servers. They have a data store for their critical SQL servers. They get very good commonality between those SQL servers. And in fact, in here we talk about something that relates to those SQL servers, a little bit about DR for them. But yes, the answer is yes. If you make sure your data store has commonality in the virtual machines that are stored within it, the more common, the more deduplication. So this is just a reminder slide of a number of things about data recovery. We can sort of see that green really didn't turn out well. Starting at the top, it talks about how it's a virtual appliance. I love virtual appliances. It's very important to me that you can very easily suck this thing into Virtual Center, and you don't even have to play with you can use DHCP. It's fully supported, and you can not even worry about static IP addresses, so you can be very quick at getting this to work. That's the power of a virtual appliance. Wait till you see our next generation next year of virtual appliance. Very, very cool stuff. What we see below it is a little confusing. First time use, when you back up a virtual machine, it's a full backup. The second time, it's incremental. It's not incremental like the old days, though. In fact, we're trying to not use the word incremental, and I would have deleted that word if I had found it, because it's complicated. We have a slide to talk about it later on. Really, what we do is a full backup, and then we do synthetic full backups, and we'll talk more about that. We have VSS integration. So what that means is every time we do a backup of a virtual machine, we talk to VMware Tools, and VMware Tools does the best it can at acquiescing through VMware Tools, the operating system, and the applications. We do not do log management. So you can have a SQL server that's quiesced, but we don't do any of the management of the log files. We just can't. But we are working exceptionally hard on that. We have a fellow dedicated so that next year we'll have a new version of VMware Tools, and one of the things that it'll be able to do, and my fingers are crossed big time, is in fact manage the log files for SQL, so that our VSS integration with VMware Tools will go that far. And that'll mean, as an example, you won't have to pay company XYZ to put an agent in SQL. And to be honest, it'll work real good. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. But I wouldn't really say that the cluster is supported or not supported. Really, this was originally designed for the SMB market. And then, of course, when we discovered there was so many big companies buying it that we had to sort of reevaluate that. That's where we're moving down the path for VMware Tools as an example. But as an example, in clusters, we really didn't test that. You have my email address. You remind me, and I'll get a better answer. As we read through the list here, remember I said this wasn't my slide, right? We say that we support NFS. That would be one of those confusing marketing terms. We support NFS when there's a virtual machine running on NFS, and we can back it up successfully. We, however, cannot use NFS as a destination to write a data destination, or we can't write out to NFS. Locking issues, and I believe last year I said we're working on it, and guess what? We're still working on it. And actually, I'm not being facetious. We really are. It's a very difficult issue to fix. CIF shares, we have some pretty strong best practices. I'm going to be rather forceful about recommending them to you, but we do fully support them. They're particularly useful for data recovery kind of stuff, but we'll talk about that. Some of the things down here at the bottom are sort of interesting. We'll skip over some. So we have a wizard. That's the decline of civilization, almost. Everything is becoming a wizard, and we have them too. Pardon me? You can interject stuff. I don't mind at all. In fact, if it's really good, I'll tell other people. Seriously, what else can we do here, right? We're stuck here for 9 days. Last line, though, is really important. You're going to learn some best practices from me around that, too. As a virtual machine is vMotioned around, we don't actually care. Because what we're going to do is we're not going to specify backup virtual machine XYZ. We're going to say backup virtual machine MoRef and a number this long. And that means no matter where that virtual machine moves, that we could probably engineer a circumstance where it could move somewhere we can't find it. But through DRS, through vMotion, storage vMotion, we'll continue to back it up. That's pretty cool, guys, but you should remember that, and you should expect that. Let me give you another example. We have a firewall product. Probably nobody's heard of it, but we have a firewall product. And it doesn't base its rules on IP addresses. It bases its rules on the same thing this guy does. So think about it for a moment. You have a web server that you have a rule protecting it so that it only has inbound port 80 from the internet. But somebody changes its IP address or it gets vMotioned around, well, our firewall product doesn't care because it's looking at the virtual machine and it's using its MoRef, just like VDR. So as it moves around, is it vMotion, storage vMotion, whatever, we don't care. The rules still apply. Sort of interesting. Here's one of the marketing kind of slides that we generally toss in. We're supposed to have a screen here, aren't we? I just realized you guys, with me standing in the way in particular, can't see over here. So I'll try and stand better. So what we've got a little list here is of the improvements that we've made in the current version. And folks, the current version is a big deal. If there's anybody here who's using VDR and aren't using the newest version, I strongly urge you, before you go out drinking tonight, to change that. No, I'm serious. The number of fixes are significant. So what else do we have in here? So there's marketing lingo up here I couldn't avoid. Notice how we say when using vSphere 4.1, app-level quiescing with Win2K8, and Win7 should be up there too. That's not entirely, it's not true, basically. But it's also true. That is, and I talked to Asmir about this because, of course, it immediately caught my attention, and it is sort of true, but it's according to Microsoft documentation. It is technically true because Microsoft documentation say that. Yeah, I said this. Well, it is true according to Microsoft, and according to me, Michael White, it's not true. And the reason it's not true is because application level acquiescing means something a little different to the customers I know and to me than it does to Microsoft. That's almost verbatim from their documentation. But if you go get a SQL server and you back it up with no agents, you're going to get a backup, but you are going to get a backup that I call crash consistent. The logs aren't going to be managed. So that's technically true in the marketing literature from Microsoft, and so we had to write it. But in practical application, it's a little different. That's why we're putting enormous money into VMware Tools, so that VMware Tools next year, in our next major release, will in fact make that true according to me. We will get an application-consistent backup of SQL. This is a really big deal. I deal with this all the time with customers who've been replicating their SQL servers, their Exchange servers, their Domino servers from one site to another. I'm a BCDR guy. I do that all the time with customers, and they always wake up broken. Sometimes it's a 60-second fix by Exchange. No big deal, it does it itself. Sometimes it's 20 minutes. Sometimes Oracle needs an hour. Sometimes 40 minutes. And all of those are because of crash consistency versus application consistency. And that's why I'm ruthless on this. It's really not to the level of application consistency that I think you would expect. Two big issues. Damaged data stores, meaning when you come in the morning and look at VMware Data Recovery, you actually see damaged restore points. We actually have a filter item, which is a great idea, which shows only them. And of course, there's ways to deal with it. But we've actually fixed that. We've solved that issue. So 1.2, we have not had any calls from customers on that particular issue. So there's a good reason right there to upgrade if you haven't. And we've had some issues that are what we call hung, meaning you start a backup and, well, It's still running right now. And that too is fixed here. We have a nice little blog that Asmir wrote that covers off in a little more detail what we're talking about here. Question, yes? No. No, so the gentleman was just asking about fault tolerance and VDR. We have a number of applications. VDR is one, Site Recovery Manager is another one, where we cannot preserve the state of FT. But we preserve the state, we do a good backup. So what that translates to is in a crisis, you use VDR to back up and then you do a restore. What you have to do is re-enable FT. So it comes out, but it comes out. And I believe if you do a Google very soon now, or maybe last week, something like that, there's a script that you can use that'll automatically bring it back. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Oh, tricky. So, the gentleman is asking, is this enterprise ready? And the gentleman went on to mention a number of things about how he's seen data recovery be a little flaky and really not up to enterprise level. Well, here's my opinion, and we all understand that means you can't complain to VMware what I said. It's just my opinion. My opinion is 1.2 is, in my experience and customers I visit, not flaky in any way, shape, or form. It works very, very well. However, to answer your question, I believe this is not enterprise-ready software. And let me explain why. You have to go into this software every day. Forgot to do it this morning for my labs here. You have to go into it every day and check the status of the jobs the night before. That one thing, in my opinion, makes this not enterprise-ready. Now, to be honest, we have a bunch of customers, I've met them, that are using this in enterprise ways. They're writing out to data domain boxes that are just huge, and they've got 10, 12, 15 appliances all doing backups. But because you have to check the logs, in their case, they check a lot of logs. Not logs, you have to check the screen, and you have to see if the backups were successful. My opinion is that this is not really ready for most companies' enterprise use. And we are going to resolve that. I'm working right now on a blog trying to make this report to a syslog server and turn a syslog message into an email to try and mitigate this problem. But I can also tell you we're putting huge effort. It's, I saw a demo. It's sort of like alpha mode. It'll be beta soon, where we'll provide email reporting in this. In that time frame, I think that it might be worthy, a lot closer to enterprise. And just hold on, guys. Just last thing. I recommend those enterprises to use this for the IT guys instead of snapshots. Snapshots, I'm sure some of you might agree with me when I say they're a pain. Incidentally, we're going to fix that. Our next major release, snapshots, won't have redo logs. Think about that for a moment. It's actually going to be a function of VMFS. Anyways, maybe you don't care, but I care. It'll mean a lot easier. But for today, snapshots are difficult to manage. And what I do, when I would normally use a snapshot, what I do right now is I take a backup with VDR. I can still pull it back perfectly. I'm happy. But yet, at the same time, I don't have redo logs that are slowly expanding and about to take over my system. So some of the really large VMware customers I work with, they use it for that. They still don't use it for enterprise backup, but they use it in the IT or in the labs to replace snapshots. Oh, yes. Still true. We'll talk about that when we get, and a few other things around that for scalability when we get into the best practices. Did I see another question over here? Yes. I'm sorry, yes. Thank you for reminding me. The question, and I appreciate that. I'm supposed to do that. So we had the question about scalability limits. In the past, we've mentioned that 100 virtual machines backed up by this tool is roughly the limit, and that's still true. Even in the current version, 100 VMs is still a really good guideline. In fact, in 1.2, it's hard-coded for that. But we also have some other things we've done to improve scalability, so you can back up a lot more than 100 VMs, but we'll talk about that. Per appliance, yes, thank you. 100 virtual machines backed up per appliance. Oh, I'm not supposed to say that's a very good question anymore, but you know, that's a very good question. So I'm not sure how many of you have played with VMware Update Manager. I love that tool, and it does expire snapshots. So what that means is, to be honest, is we're experimenting. We're pretty darn sure it works and works well, but we put it out not everywhere, but in one place, and we're waiting to see what people think of it. And I hate to say it, not a lot of people are saying anything. So that's bad, because product managers, that's what they look for. But the fact is it works real well, and I played a lot with it, and I'm very happy. So I've done my part to suggest we should have that in other places. So yes, we are thinking about it. Did you? No, actually, that's a really good question. Yes, I will ask. There's a very nice lady I can ask that of. I can see pros and cons. The gentleman was just asking about when you work with VMware Update Manager, instead of using snapshots, using this product, which is sort of interesting. So, yes. So the question is, as this moves more towards the enterprise, how does that affect our relationship with our storage partners and our backup partners, of which generally we have some fairly serious relationships? Well, I can mention one of the first things we're going to do next release is that VMware Tools thing. Believe it or not, they love that, because that means they can do less work on their agents and actually less money, and they'll be able to get a better result. And it'll look like they're doing it, but actually they're using our VMware tools. So I think it'll be an exciting, tenuous relationship. Yes. So this gentleman was just asking about using this to do some of the tiers of backup in a way, such as nearline and having offline done by the Tivoli's or the net backups that you traditionally use. And there's a lot of ideas like that you can do. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that in some of the later slides if we can get past this one. But yes, that's a good idea. We are, after all, on slide 8. So really, this is the snapshot about installing the product. You really just suck in an OVF file. It spits out a virtual machine that's working. Generally, I think I mentioned, yes, adding a VMDX. I'm going to give you some ideas around the best practices of where to use VMDK files, performance and other reasons, but really, this is it, and I have a snapshot here. When you pull down the data recovery, what you actually get is a zip file or an ISO file. It varies a little, and inside of it, you'll see this. You'll actually notice the OVF folder. So you go into the File menu, and you point at that folder, and inside the folder, there'll be a file, and you just pull it in. It'll ask you a few questions like network, like data store. I think it asks you the time zone, if I remember correctly. And literally, it deposits that VMDK, that VMX file, up in a folder on the data store that you selected. And it works very, very well. Now, here's something that's a little different you may not be used to. Notice how there's a plug-in MSI there? If you've worked with any of our packages, generally, all you need to do is in the vSphere client, go to the plugins menu, and install the plugin. In this case, because it's a virtual appliance that's actually not connected to Virtual Center, we actually have to install that plugin manually. It's not very hard, it goes quick. As a best practice, I suggest you install the plugin first, then install the appliance. Here's an example where we're actually importing the OVF file. So incidentally, OVF files, just think of them as zip files. Today, I think there's a limit of 1 or 2 different, I think maybe 1 VMDK on the inside of an OVF file. In the very next release, there'll be a limit of 16 or something, I forget. But it's a zip file with metadata. We can just select it here, and I think I have, no I don't. We actually select it here, but then it asks you questions, or it doesn't ask you questions, as the metadata has taken care of it for you. I know corporations that they use our Studio package. They use OVFs to send packages, like a zip file, to another office. And then when they import it, there's no questions, because the parent office, the head office, has answered all the questions, so that virtual machine is deployed with the head office sort of rules. In any case, we install it. When we configure it, we just need to do a couple of things. We turn it on. DHCP is optional, meaning if you use it, everything works fine. I happen to not use DHCP if I can avoid it for things like appliances, but it's totally optional. We change the root account password. We notice how secure it is up there, right? And you know almost nobody does change it. When we get the logs, we can tell. And then use the plugin. It's going to prompt you for your credentials, and then it's going to start the wizard, and you'll, within 2 minutes, if you don't change the IP address, within 2 minutes you'll be doing a backup. If you do need to change it from DHCP, like I do, whoops, I don't like using DHCP, I mentioned that. This is where we can come. This is the console. I guess I shouldn't have chopped off. We're actually in the console in the vSphere client. This is where you would come to change the network information from DHCP to an IP address. Take care of DNS. As well, notice how it has PDT. Most of our coders might actually be in Sofia, Bulgaria, or Cambridge, or Toronto. But somehow everything we do at VMware has a Pacific Daylight Time zone. So you'll want to change that. That's actually important. It sounds silly. I should have made it a best practice, actually, but I didn't. You should always change that so that the logs are always in the consistent time. So across your enterprise, the log times all they'll match anyways, but it'll be a better thing to work with. Creating a backup job, very straightforward, and a little different than in the past. If you click the new button, very straightforward, you're actually prompted for a job, which we didn't do in the past, or prompted for a name. On this screen, we can select virtual machines to do a backup of. But what I want to point at, whoops, daisy, is if we look in here, see all the checkboxes. Now, what people are in a habit of doing is checking see where it says FVSAP? That's my Falcon Store storage array, a virtual one. But people will check that box and back up that virtual machine. Now, I'm a little ahead of the game, but this is a best practice I would suggest you think of. Instead of checking that box, go up one level and check it in the resource pool there called Local Miscellaneous. And guess why? The next time you deploy a virtual machine, if you happen to put it in the resource pool Local Miscellaneous that night, it'll get backed up. Very handy, and it's certainly saved my bacon a few times when I'm in a rush, when I'm on the road, and I deploy something in a hurry, it's going to get backed up, even if I forget to do it. This is where we get to pick the data store that we're going to write out to. We can only have 2. I'll sometimes have that 2 organized a little differently. We'll talk about that later, but we just simply select it. This is sort of interesting. This tells you the gray. I always thought it should be green, but anyways, the gray means you're allowed to do a backup once per day. So the appliance in the gray is going to do once per day a backup. And where it's blue, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Gray, it won't do a backup, and where it's blue, it will do a backup once per day. And we've got the buttons there so you can select everything if you want to do a backup every day. And we can change it quite easily with just clicks if we want to. This is something that I find a little confusing sometimes. Once I actually had to challenge this and very carefully select it so I could repeat it and see if the numbers all made sense to me, and it did, thank goodness. What you're doing right here, this is making it simple. Few, more, many, as an example, means I want to have less copies of a file or more, many. So in other words, when you select one of those options, it changes the numbers down here. And of course, as you can imagine, custom, you can just go crazy and make whatever kind of rules you want. And literally that means keep that X number copies of what you've backed up. Now what's interesting is when those things expire, we say keep 8 weekly backups. You might actually have 9, because we don't delete right away. We actually will continue to work, and we'll have a task that's called reclaim that runs I think once a day. And when that task runs, then it tidies up. So just bear in mind, as soon as you hit 9 copies, or 2, or whatever it is, it doesn't immediately delete it. Here's a summary. I think this is what everybody has to have with wizards nowadays. And now it's going to look like this. Notice in the bottom there, in the status where it says waiting, it's waiting for the parameters that you set in terms of the blue area to become true. And then once, it will do a backup per day after that. We can see the destination there. Notice it's in IP. Or pardon me, notice it's an IP address versus a DNS name. By default, you're going to have troubles doing a DNS entry there or using an IP name. And one of the slides I have in the appendix is how to log in and change it or change the DNS information on the appliance so that you can use a name instead of an IP address. But if you're using DHCP, you'll have to use or not always, but most of the time you'll have to use an IP. That's absolutely a good question to ask because I forgot to put that anywhere in here. So in 1.2, the developers added something that I was very, very happy about. They added the ability to delete logs. I'm not sure. Somewhere in here, I think I have a slide and I'll show you. You can have a big log that shows a whole bunch of different things, and you can absolutely right-click and select delete and clear things out. On 1.2, yes. Now, when I, in the middle of the day, create a backup, I did this on Sunday when we had reached, Sunday, when we had a bunch of stuff for our truck that hopefully you guys will see and get a kick out of. When it was all working and I was happy, I looked at all my guys and I said, you know what, it's time. But we had already done a backup early Sunday morning, so it wasn't going to do another backup till Monday night sometime. So what I did is I right-clicked on our jobs and I selected Backup Now, All Sources. And that means go out and back everything up. If you select the out-of-date sources, which I quite like sometimes, it only backs up the things that haven't been backed up yet. In other words, the new machines I had deployed. So quite handy. You'll remember that I think we used to call that bring to compliance or something. I think this is a little nicer. Very good question. Oh, there I go again. I shouldn't be saying that. We can tell in this case that we're actually using a CIFS share. Yeah. We'll talk about that. I saw a call for help recently, and the customer was using a CIFS share that had free 5.4 terabytes of storage. And we don't support that much. We support a max of 2. And yet he had free 5.4 and was complaining to us about performance issues. Yeah, CIFS, you have to be careful, and I have a list of best practices around CIFS. So the question is about, will we ever support iSCSI volumes as a destination? I haven't heard any discussion of that. Right now, we would say we support iSCSI, but with VMFS layered on it. So I haven't heard of anything, but I'll see if what happens. So we'll just move right along. We're in the restore process now. What we're looking at is a number of backups. Notice right here, we've got 5 restore points. So even if there's 1,000 restore points, like I have in one of my labs, really a large number, I leave it on this 5, because generally, all I need to do is see the latest backups, or to choose first to choose the restore from, or second to see if everything is successful. And what we can see here is we can see all the important information, I think, about the restore points, things like date, time, but also, notice what we have here too, backup location. This looks a little different than the previous screen. That's, unfortunately, sort of code for saying we're backing up to a VMDK. And we'll talk about that in our best practices. We can simply highlight one of our boxes, and that would be the start of our restore process. We're able to select as part of a wizard what we need. This is an interesting screen during the recovery. Notice we have a number of columns up here. It's hard to tell by looking, but those things are live. You can push them. You can say right here, do not restore the configuration. I'm not sure why you would do it, but you have an option. The one that I like to use sometimes is right on the end here, reconnect the NIC. That's very handy when you have users that are using a virtual machine and they need to get certain files back. You can mount it without a network connection. You can go into it. You can pull the files out and do whatever it is you need to do. And this is when we've got our decisions all made and what's actually going to happen. In this case, we can tell a few things interesting. Notice right here the funny little red thing. That means we're actually going to overwrite something that's already there. So we might have a corrupt VM, and instead of deleting it and dealing with it, we're just going to simply write out to it, write over it. We can watch what's happening in the restore process. We can see the percentage. We actually get calls from customers that say the restore went too quick. And that's sort of a nice thing to complain about. But what the customer didn't know is that we use the same technology to do a backup, to do a restore. We use something called change block tracking. Whenever we do a backup, or whenever we do a restore, we ask an API what blocks have changed. And we only back up the blocks that changed. That makes the second backup very fast indeed. It's called changed block tracking, and any of the name brand for backup products today, the Net Backups, the Seagate execs, the Veeams, Vision Cores, Commvault, all of those guys will do change block tracking support, which means your second backup is very fast indeed. But the restore uses it. If you're writing out the whole VM, doesn't really matter. But if you're writing out the whole VM over top of the old VM, it can be a really quick restore because it only has to write out the blocks that are different. Very, very interesting technology, I think. Here's something, yes? Correct. I often, when I do a restore of a new VM, I'll do it without the network connection just in case, incomplete information. But I've been getting in the habit of the last year or so, I try not to do that. I try and overwrite the old one because it goes faster. So, interesting question. And the question is, can we handle local data stores, or should we be in a best practice of having our destinations on shared storage? That's a good thing to think about because, of course, if it's on local storage, there's no vMotion capabilities. DRS is never going to help you. If you accidentally forget and do a restore to a really busy web farm, DRS isn't going to save your bacon. Because you put it onto non-shared storage, we can't do anything. So really, I would suggest that generally, without knowing more, dropping it back on shared storage is a little more flexible. But at the same time, local storage works fine, absolutely. Yes. So the question has to do with, if you put it local, you really are going to lose things out, such as vMotion. And I think it'll make this a lot harder to work. This is a file-level restore utility. This utility is designed to be given to end users. This is given to an end user. It supports the accreditation or the credentials, and it allows a user to pull back a file. Now, of course, a lot of our customers, it turns out, want this, and then they don't use it. And not because it doesn't work, because it's a beautiful GUI tool. It's very straightforward. I've used it many times, and it works. But it's just a little different than what people are used to. Most of our customers will actually, believe it or not, the administrator will do this, or the administrator will pull back the whole VM and then pull the files out of it and email it or put it on a share to a user. We actually have a command line version of this now for Linux. This is just what it looks like in the GUI. You actually, if you have the rights, you get to see all the different backup jobs and pick which one that you can actually pull files back from. And it's Explorer interface. So I just about said Finder. I'm a Mac guy. But you go in through the Explorer, and you can just literally wander and pick the individual file, Control-C for copy, and then Control-V somewhere on a network share or whatever. Okay, so we're going to change a little bit of scope here. We're not going to be looking at the install. We're going to start looking at some technical things and some best practices. And the first thing up there is know your policies, know your retention policies. Some of the customers I deal with are military or they're financial, and they have these ruthless, tough people that every now and again visit and start auditing their work. And when you have a retention policy that doesn't match your documents, if you have a written document that says, I keep all files for a year, but your retention policy says I only keep them for 2 weeks, well, you're in a spot of trouble there. So understand your retention policy. Do a restore. This just takes my breath away, but you'd be amazed at how many customers I have visited personally who haven't in the last 6 months or in the last year haven't done a restore. I've actually met customers who haven't done a restore since the software was installed. That's not a good thing. That's not something to be proud of. You need to do a restore. I would suggest if it's enterprise-level software, you should do a restore once a month to make sure that you can, in fact, do a restore. We have file-level restores available in Windows and Linux. It's not backwards compatible. We cannot do a backup of virtual machines held on old ESX servers. Virtual Hardware 7 is needed for our advanced technology, such as change block tracking, such as FT as an example. So that's what the real deal breaker is. If you have a virtual machine that's from a 3.5 host and it's running on a 4 host, we can back it up. But because it doesn't have Virtual Hardware 7, it's going to take a really long time to back up. Deduplication is first image backup is an image backup. It takes everything. But the second one is called, or what we like to call it, is a synthetic full. We only back up what's changed. But because of the way we do the backups, we're able to do a restore that looks like, to you, a full restore. And it is. But we don't have to go through a whole bunch of different incremental backups. Deduplication is block level, not file. And it happens across our VMs. That's where I mentioned it's a good idea to have similar VMs in the data store to really increase your decrease, whichever way it goes, so that you have very efficient use of space. We still can't, believe it or not, we still can't change the fact that it's once in every 24-hour period we do a backup. It's just a little more work than it sounds. And then there's a reminder there, if you select at the resource pool or the cluster level, you're going to get any new VMs backed up, whether you want them backed up or not, and generally that's a good thing. This is really where we talk about retention. This is where, for me, as an example at a customer site, I would talk to them on a whiteboard, where we'd really sort of count up, what does this mean, and draw a picture of it. This is where we can see on a virtual machine the virtual hardware level, just the summary screen. We can always right-click on the VM to change it. And I say the right-click thing, but really, I work with customers that sometimes have hundreds or thousands or 10,000 virtual machines, and of course, you can't right-click on 8,000 virtual machines. We would use VMware Update Manager to do it there. Archiving. This is a really good one to know, in my opinion. This is the way that you would be able to do a backup, or a series of backups. Let's pretend what I use, actually, is an iOmega device. I have 2 iOmega devices, and I don't really do this, but what I could do is I could use this instructions to be able to take one of those iOmega devices and put it off-site. Very, very handy. In fact, I have some screenshots for it. The other thing you can use this with is not just nicely moving your data store somewhere else in a usable condition, but once you've done this, even if you don't move it, and a tape backup device or disk-to-disk kind of device backs up that data store, it's in very good condition. You will be able to restore it somewhere else and make it usable. So very handy. Do you notice this here? This is something I'm really, really impressed with, and I like it a lot. I've told all the developers I know what a great idea. Every data store has in it not just your backups, but it has your jobs and the index and the catalog. So literally, you move that data store to somewhere else, and you have an OVF or you have a copy of the appliance. You've got everything. You have your jobs, your index, your catalog, and in fact, all your backups. Very self-contained. So if I understand everything that you've said, what you're asking is if you don't do the unmount, and you have a copy of the data store somewhere that hasn't been unmounted, but it has actually been forcibly or through an outage or something like that unmounted, you might actually have some issues. But I would generally say that with maybe a little bit of work, not maybe, with a little bit of work, they should be retrievable. And it involves doing a reclaim, an integrity check, and maybe doing a couple of integrity checks. But quite frankly, I would suggest you just call us and we'll work with you. But yes, I've done that a bunch of times by accident, and every time I've not lost anything but a bit of time. Question in the back? I'm sorry, could you say that again? No. Was that an Australian accent that asked me that question? Okay, I apologize. Very good point. I was just asked that question by an Australian recently, and I brought it up to product management, and they're thinking about it. Today, there's no PowerShell access. There's no way to do that sort of thing, but it's now on the roadmap. So one day. Here's where so you go into, we can see it on the left side here. We're in the configuration menu, destinations, and we can get to the unmount. So we highlight the data store and hit unmount, and now that means it's being closed nicely. It's application quiesced, in other words, and you can copy it or you can back it up, do whatever you need to do. Here's an exciting feature. I quite like this one. This allows you to do an unmount of the data. Pardon me, I should back up. This allows you to make your data store location larger. It's quite easy. You really just go into the vSphere client, and just like you can for any of our virtual machines, you can click on the virtual machine, right-click and go to Edit Settings, and then select the hard disk in question, and you can go up to the top right corner, and you can actually make it larger. It's a live action while the virtual machine is running. Then you restart, in this case. You have to restart the appliance. You unmount it. You may get a prompt to do an integrity check, but the fact is you use the extend option when the destination is not running or it's unmounted, and it will grow to that new size. So it works very well. I've used it quite a many times. So here's the vSphere client where we're going to change the size. Very straightforward. We do an unmount and then we do an extend, and it becomes larger. Yes? No. So the question is, when we're doing that archiving, is it the contents of the destination? And the answer is no. When we do the unmount, that destination is actually now closed. And so if you use Commvault to back it up, what you're going to back up is closed. You're backing up the outside of it, if that makes sense. And later on with Commvault, you would restore it, install another appliance, point the appliance at that restored data store. Does that make sense? Yes. Yes. I think you asked me that question before, too, didn't you? Last year, I think. Oh, yes. So, right now, this capacity really has a limit, hard limit, I believe now, of 2 terabytes. But in a couple of slides where we talk about best practices, that's not what I would recommend in a CIFS share, and we'll see that in just a moment. In fact, maybe right here, actually. So keep your data stores to around 1 terabyte in the middle there. The max is 2, but from a performance standpoint, 1 seems to be a better number to work with. And for CIFS, 500 gig. The other thing, too, and we have a real problem with this in our support organization, we have a lot of customers who have spent $100, $139, and they've bought a CIFS device, and then they use VDR to write out to a $139 CIFS device. It's a little problematic. Those devices don't have much capability for throughput, and a continual writing of a whole bunch of data once a day is a bit hard on them. And that's why sometimes we need to say a 500 gigabyte maximum recommendation for the size of the CIFS share. And even on those $100 devices, that'll make things work a lot better. My CIFS devices, I think, are all $800 or higher, and I don't have any of the issues that some of our customers call us with. But starting at the top, this is my list of sort of strong recommendations, starting with use the OVF to install. You don't have to, but I strongly recommend it. Static IP that you add into DNS, I think is a very good idea. 2 destinations, and then 100 virtual machines per appliance. We can actually have 10 appliances now, if that's what you need to do. Now, this is a real fine point, but I'm a detail guy sometimes, and I recommend you use a thick virtual machine disk instead of a thin. I know it's the in thing to do thin provisioning. Everybody likes to do it, and for most things, I don't really care. But because this is a backup device, and because at times it's going to have a lot of throughput hammering at it, I do recommend you start with thick, not thin. And I strongly recommend VMDK. The performance you get from backing up to a VMDK, comparison to a CIFS share, is huge. Huge. So as an example, if you're doing backups for DR, then I say put it on a CIFS share, but buy a nice CIFS share. But if you're doing backup so that you can recover files from users, I would not hesitate in an instant. I would always use a VMDK. It's fast, fast, fast. Yo, question.
Well, you said at most two destinations per appliance, and for example, we have these guidelines and we have three. Is there an easy way to consolidate the backups into one destination?
So the gentleman is asking about consolidating a number of appliances into less. And the answer is yes, it's not that hard. We can't move the contents of a destination to another destination, but it's very easy to recreate jobs and just go. That's correct. We can't do that at this time. I'm afraid so. We have no way to move backup the restores between destinations. Here's something that I have to strongly make sure everybody understands. So if anybody doesn't, please argue with me or ask again. For any VMware product, anytime you get into trouble, before you call us, give us the support log. So go to our website, upload the log file, and then call us. You will always get better and quicker answers. And even for VDR, there's the knowledge base article on how to grab the log bundle. Doesn't take long. And guess what? I talk to the developers when I have a problem, and I first get the log file. It really means when I'm talking even to a developer, much less a support guy, I get much better help much quicker. Sometimes, before I even talk to the guy, I get the result. I get the answer. So log file is really important. And on the last line here, I mentioned you may have to edit the host file if you're having trouble going out by name to your CIFS devices. 5 to 8 gigabytes is what we need in the beginning of the data store or the destination. So I suggest starting with a 40 gigabyte data destination. You can grow that very quick. In just a few minutes, you can grow it larger as necessary, but at least 40 gig. Have the virtual machines in a particular destination be similar if you can. In other words, what some customers do is they have a Linux destination and they have a Windows destination. And that makes for a much more efficient deduplication, which means less space in use. Oh yeah. Be careful about doing upgrades. Before we had documentation, I did an upgrade. I accidentally deleted my VMDK that had all my backups in it. And now, of course, we document that very, very carefully, and I don't make that mistake anymore. But the fact is, when you upgrade your appliance, and I use VMDKs just like I suggest you guys should, well, then you move that VMDK from the old appliance to the new one, and you're good to go. But we step through it in the documents very carefully. Here's something a lot of people miss, and it sometimes causes issue. The VDR plugin, make sure you use the same version of the VDR plugin as the appliance. You always download them both. We force you to do that. They both come down. Make sure you upgrade both of them. It will help. Here's a little trick you can do. Dedicated virtual SCSI adapters. That helps with performance a little bit. I must admit, half the time I don't do that and I don't notice any difference. But here's a good one. This is one of my little personal things. I do this now religiously. I will always do an integrity check before I upgrade. And generally, I've gotten into the habit where my wife comes home from work. I work at home a lot. She comes home. I start the integrity check, and then I go help with dinner. And by the time I'm just about ready for bed, the integrity check is finished, and then I do the upgrade. And then that night, I get a good backup. And the backup works much better over time, over a whole bunch of upgrades because of that integrity check. I really recommend it. Part of the reason is because we make fixes for the data store as well as for the application. And that means when you do the integrity check, you're making sure everything is healthy before those fixes are applied. For DR stuff, this is real important to know. This last thing, this is new, really big deal. You can actually do restores without Virtual Center. That would be actually how you can restore Virtual Center in a critical situation when Virtual Center happens to be virtual and you happen to have backed it up with VDR. So we're just about finished here, and I think I got the eye from back there. Here are a number of different resources that are useful. You will have this deck. In fact, I believe you have it now if you want it. It was supposed to go out last night. What we have here is just some more things. Availability, this is where you can find it. We have demos of it here. In fact, at the big red truck, if you come say hi, they're there. Self-paced labs have some VDR stuff. Here's an important summary that I think is really good information to know, but it's just reminders. Oh, I didn't put this in. This is one of the things that happen when you give slides to other people. This is an important slide. These are all the questions that I think you guys should ask me, but maybe you're in a hurry, and they got the answers. So this is sort of cool stuff. When you're at home, when you get away from this place, and you're relaxing, and you look at this deck, and you get this deck. Incidentally, I have notes. You can't see them here, but these slides... Whoa, whoops. These slides... Below it in the notes section, I have notes. That is more information, but there's some good stuff just on this slide. And thank you for being here. Thank you for being VMware customers, and you have 5 extra minutes to your day now. Thanks.